So, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure and honor to have this roundtable discussion, the first one of the EU Center of Korea University, which is called KU-KIEP-SBS EU Center. The title of our today's event is Regional Order in Northeast Asia, European and Korean Perspectives. And the roundtable will be beginning by two keynote remarks by very prominent two speakers. The first speaker I'd like to introduce is Ambassador Viorel Istijoaia Budura from Romania. But he's currently in the EEAS, European External Action Service of the European Commission. And he has been long career diplomat for more than 35 years, from 1978. And also Ambassador Budura was Ambassador of Romania to Korea for 2 years, from 2002 to 2004, as well as he was seconded to China and Mongolia to assume the position of ambassador as well. So he's the most suitable European speaker who can speak about Northeast Asian regional order from European perspective. So why don't you welcome him with big hands.
Yes, good morning. Yeah, for me it should be quite an early morning. Sorry if I won't be able to adjust immediately on the spot given the jet lag. I'm happy to have the chance after stepping down from the plane after overnight flight from Brussels to Frankfurt to land into such a very welcoming and warm atmosphere, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm not sure it's my first visit to Korea University. As Professor has rightfully said, I have sinned. I was falling in love as a younger Romanian diplomat sent as ambassador to Seoul, and indeed my love for Korea was at that time in a very good moment. I was telling to the professor that I landed at that time in 2000 at a very exciting historical moment when first time ever the President of the Republic here went to Pyongyang and having direct discussions with the leaders over there. For us as foreign diplomats and friends of Koreans, was exciting, was interesting, was challenging, we were optimistic, the reality was tougher, and we are still dreaming about the fact that the history, the experience, and the political wisdom may once again produce positive developments in the future. And because of that, I would add to my presence to Korea University and to the EU Center here another motivation and an additional reason for my visit here, which is the excellent relations we have with the Republic of Korea, the care and the attention the EU, the member states are given to the peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula in Northeast Asia, and the role your country is playing. And again, my personal motivation is to join the NAPCHI conference. It's the first forum, which is going to be in 2 days, later on upgraded to a conference in October in the next months. And as a sign of our attention and support, a few weeks ago, when my boss, High Representative Ashton, has visited, listening to Her Excellency President Park, High Representative Ashton, on behalf of the Member States and the Union, on behalf of our Service for External Action, committed to contribute, to support, to share our experience in the support of this important initiative. I'm happy to join you in reflecting on this important subject about Northeast Asia, because if you wish, and I will kindly beg your understanding, always the speaker goes on a very personal note. I'm eager to share briefly with you my experience as 4 years head of the Asia and Pacific Department in the European External Action Service, and saying how much Northeast Asia was a focus of our agenda, our policies, our action. For good reason, for something which I'm sure, and from this point of view, let me share how much I'm excited, and I feel that it's a fantastic experience to have the freshly established center of the EU here as something which may bridge, may link us, bridge over distances, bridge over various perspectives, but build up to a common understanding, common agenda, and a joint up effort for securing peace and stability in this part of the world. Then European External Action Service had as initial priorities 4 in which you may very easily find something which is linked to Northeast Asia. To consolidate and update the relations with strategic partners. Out of the 10 strategic partners in the world, the EU has in this region 3 Asian strategic partners: Republic of Korea, China, Japan, plus Russia, which we see from the European side, plus US, if you wish, on the other side of the Pacific, for us on the other side of the Atlantic. But my duty was, and once again, I'm just recalling how my boss, Baroness Ashton, after appointing me, was the focus priority is on the strategic partners in Asia, the 3 ones. This is the work of my department. And let me say, as I had the privilege to accompany her visiting a few months ago, she was recalling how much herself, as initially Trade Commissioner and then as the High Representative of the Union for Security and Defense Policies, she contributed personally to the way in which the Republic of Korea became a model, an example of our relationship, an endeavor in which, the way in which we cooperated with the successive presidents of the Republic here, prime ministers, government, various governments and governmental agencies and ministries, was fruitful, was beneficial, and mutually cooperative. Now, out of the 3 strategic partners in the region, the Republic of Korea has the most accomplished, comprehensive, and consolidating structure of bilateral relations with the European Union. 3 important agreements as a platform on which not only bilaterally EU institutions can develop with the Republic of Korea, but also as a framework which offers a potential and benefits to 28 member states and to the Korean partners. The FTA, that was the first, which High Representative Ashton contributed to. And then the framework agreement, the political agreement. And thirdly, just recently, this year, signed together with Foreign Minister Yoon, the framework participation agreement, which means cooperation in crisis management. For the time being, it's the only country in the region, the only also among the strategic partners in Asia, reaching this level of engagement, and which shows how much our relations are strong, stable, and comprehensive. Again, I would say this is not happened just because, as I was saying, we love, we admire, we support you. It happened also because we have shared interests and we have objective interest to work to this relationship to contribute to the stability, peace, and cooperation in this region. We do not ignore China, Japan, Russia, or US in their role in the region. Then from this point of view, I may add to this landscape of the European perspective of Northeast Asia, the way in which in these 4 years of the functioning of the European External Action Service in my department, we developed very close relations with Japan. In May 2011, immediately after I took office, I had a chance to participate as a privileged diplomat to the first summit at that time with Japan, and the launch of the decision to start FTA negotiations and framework agreement political negotiations. And as it happens, after a number of years, I'm still the lead negotiator for the political framework agreement labeled Strategic Partnership Agreement with Japan, already 1 year into that, and we are quite advanced. And in parallel, as decided by the summit, as I was saying, in May 2011, also for more than 1 year, the colleagues from General Department of Trade in the European Commission are negotiating, once again, please pay attention to that, in a parallel, symmetrical way with the political agreement, a comprehensive free trade agreement with Japan, EU-Japan FTA, with the ambition to finish these two agreements next year. Then we are trying to catch up with the Republic of Korea. I'm happy that the Koreans moved so fast, but we are trying to catch up, as I was saying, to have a balanced approach, comprehensive with all the partners, strategic partners in the region. With China, it's a different story. For the time being, while the Chinese friends are insisting for an FTA, I'm not sure for the time being we are ready for that, and we are aiming since January, when we launched negotiations, at concluding a comprehensive, ambitious, balanced investment agreement, which may also cover a lot of issues which I'm sure the business community here in Korea may tell us how important it is for everyone. Elements in respect to the market access, to the IPR, intellectual property rights, problems which are sometimes created in the relations with the Chinese partners by export subsidies, and many other aspects which, for the time being, do not offer the best conditions for our trade to increase. But still, China is #1 partner. We are #1 trade partner for China, followed by US. It's changing sometime. I'm not sure if it's on seasonal basis, but for a while we are #1 trade partner for China, and China represents the market on which our exports are growing faster compared with other markets. With Russia and US, of course, the relationship is defined less by dimensions born out of the agenda here. We keep in touch with them in respect to that, but we have our own problems. With Russia, of course, in our backyard, since Ukraine crisis started, this is a new test, a challenge for us. It's a crisis in our own backyard, which is challenging very much the capacity of the EU, of the institutions established along the history in Europe, including NATO and the OSCE. That might be a subject on which, of course, I will welcome your interest. With the US, again, as I was saying, also is a balanced relationship. We launched, again, a comprehensive trade and investment strategic agreement. These dimensions are strategic in defining this new trade and investment framework of cooperation between the US and the European Union, because we believe that this very comprehensive agreement, by its scope, by the weight which these two partners carry in the international community, may produce a number of elements which would contribute to stabilize the international trade, generate new norms and standards which may secure liberalization, further liberalization of the international trade in the interests of all. On the political side, of course, the relationship with US is defined by the transatlantic relations, by the way in which US represents a lead partner in NATO, and of course in addressing challenges from Middle East to Ukraine, Russia, and in many other parts of the world. Again, of course, the way in which Korean Peninsula, with the challenges of the North Korean program of missile technology and the nuclear program, represents a challenge for the non-proliferation and disarmament international regime. We share our views with partners, first with the Republic of Korea, trying as much as possible to keep each other's update. I do not hide from you that we've seen with quite good deal of concern that six-party talks, a mechanism which we supported from the very beginning, did not succeed to restart the engines and to continue a process which all along the way have proved having a lot of positive elements and being able to engage with all interested parties. We used not only our channels with Republic of Korea, our regular consultations and exchange of views on Asian affairs or on bilateral issues to convey our support and encouragement for the inter-Korean relations and for the process in the six-party talks, but also we used these channels, diplomatic channels, the bilateral ones, including at the summit level, to express these views through our discussions with US, China, Russia, Japan. At the same time, when we had chances, because we don't have regular and we don't have political dialogue with Korea, we have with DPRK, we have what we call a critical engagement, threefold one, which includes the probability of having political contacts, as I was saying, not a regular basis. And I had visits since I took up office at Vice Minister level, Director General for European Affairs, who came in Europe and visited the European headquarters and a number of other European capitals in the member states. I was listening carefully to the way in which the officials from Pyongyang tried to express their views, their concerns about the security of their part of the world, the way in which they described the difficult relations with the US, the way in which they were having also a certain expectation about six-party talks. At the same time, as I was saying, on a second level of our concerns, we were very insistent in sharing the concerns about the human rights situation in North Korea. Of course, we had replied in that respect from the North Korean interlocutors, who always replied that these elements were rather coming from the external pressures and not exactly produced by the regime. And thirdly, we tried our best in helping. Out of humanitarian consideration, we had a program of a certain number of millions of dollars along years, which helped targeted segments of the population, the pregnant women, the children, in trying to compensate for various causes which affected the livelihood in the PRK. That was welcomed, of course, understood, supported, unfortunately, in a limited number. At occasions, we had difficulties in making this humanitarian aid and assistance, sometimes relief assistance, when they had natural problems. And we always claimed that if the access is limited, our gesture, our good intentions may not produce the desired effects. Well, I would say that lately our concerns are linked beyond the way in which, once again, we were insisting in the dialogue with the PRK to abandon the nuclear and missile program as one which is not conducive to the peace, stability in the region and in the world. Beyond that, of course, as I was saying, we were concerned about the tensions between neighbors here. We were watching, because once again, we are keen to see among the three strategic partners we have here, the Republic of Korea, Japan, and China, good neighborhood relations in the spirit of the economic and trade interdependence, cooperation, which for quite a number of years, if not for decades, secured the way in which the cooperation produced modernization, upgrading of capacities, a good deal of contribution to the opening and reform in China. And this is your merits, the merits of the Korean companies, which in a very courageous way, sometime in cooperation with some other partners, be it Japanese or Americans or Western European companies, had the courage to adventure on the Chinese market and help them to acquire new technologies, new ways of, more effective ways of management, and contributing to the way in which, along the last 3 decades, China became an economic driving force in the region and in the world. From this point of view, I'm sure the Japanese friends are very much aware how much Korea has played a role in this respect. Again, we were very keen to see why certain historical issues were not properly addressed. We know that history is a complex issue. We have our own experience in Europe. But in this respect, I would say that we have still to learn and to listen carefully to you to understand how deep, sensitive these issues are and how they should be addressed properly. I'm sorry for speaking too long. I have a lot of things to share with you because I'm sure European experience might be of interest. I'm prepared to do that with the interlocutors, as I was saying, in the following conference. But I do not forget that I came today here, first of all, to wish you success as a freshly established EU center, as one which would be very instrumental in trying to present our profile, our experience, our way of understanding the region and the world, to contribute to academic and scientific exchanges, doing research on the EU and its experience which might be relevant for Koreans, for the region. At the same time, the way in which I hope you'll be also participating in our debates about the way in which European Union now feels challenged by the crisis, by the needs to upgrade and to modernize its own capacities of developing further. Then once again, best wishes for the center. I'm happy to see, according to the presentation of the distinguished professors who were so kind to join me today, that there is a very strong human, professional, academic capacity involved in that. Thank you for joining the center. I'm happy to see the interest coming from the younger generation, from the students. I'll be happy once again to visit you in the future and contribute to this development. Then for me today, it's not only to share our views, but also to learn and support you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador Istichoaya Budura, for your insights you shared with us. Our second keynote speaker is Professor Kim Sung-han. I'd like to introduce him briefly. Professor Kim is currently President and Director of Ilmin International Relations Institute and professor at the GSIS Korea University, but he was formerly Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And he is now holding a number of very important positions, but I'd like to pick up only two of them. Professor Kim is the chair of World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on WMD, and the chair of the Korean National Committee of KU-KIEP. You know, the KU-KIEP is a Council on Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific. So he's the example of combining academic and policy-wise expertise in a person, so that we expect his valuable intervention. So, please.
Thank you, Professor Bach, for such a nice introduction about me. And also, I really welcome Ambassador Budura to Seoul. Quite frankly, I remember we met before, but I don't remember where. But obviously, we were sitting next to each other while I was participating in an international conference, either in Myanmar or Cambodia. Anyway, I had a really pleasant memory with him, so I'm very delighted to be with him. Today I will be making some brief remark on the Northeast Asian situation, particularly how to overcome the Northeast Asian paradox, so-called, and how we can get closer to a regional institutionalization like we are witnessing in the case of Europe. As you know, so-called the Northeast Asian paradox refers to the situation in which Northeast Asian countries are, cooperating economically, but they are pretty stagnant in political cooperation. This kind of a symptom has been being felt for a long time here in this part of the world. So that's why we are calling it so-called Northeast Asian paradox, which needs to be overcome as soon as possible. That's why we are trying to benchmark the European model, so-called the coexistence between bilateralism, including US-led alliances on the one hand, and the NAPSI, Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative, which is kind of a multilateral peace and security mechanism, if I say so. You know, Peter Kaczynstein, the U.S. Expert on this issue, pointed out kind of the reason why Northeast Asia or East Asia as a whole is suffering from the lack of regional institutionalization is due to a very hierarchical state-society relationship and a very distinct state structures that are unfamiliar with the Western concept of a community. I do not disagree, but I don't think this is quite a comprehensive explanation. From the realist perspective of international relations, I think the primary precondition for regional institutionalization is great power balance, the balance among great powers in that particular region. If you look at Northeast Asia, we have been experiencing the lack of war since the end of the World War II, but still we are saying the Northeast Asia is showing the lack of great power balance. But on the other hand, we have been saying that the United States has been playing a very important strategic balancer role among major powers, including Japan, China, and Russia. From this perspective, I think the role of the United States is quite indispensable in terms of a strategic balancer. So in that sense, the United States is not supposed to aggravate its relationship with China and Japan so that these two countries may not form kind of an anti-U.S. condominium. But at the same time, United States should not promote strategic rivalry between China and Japan in order to rationalize U.S. military presence as a strategic stabilizer. So that's why the role of the United States is quite important. At the same time, the other big powers' constructive roles are pretty much being emphasized. And from the institutionalist perspective, another condition for formal institutionalization in Northeast Asia is so-called historical institutionalism that focuses on the determining role of pre-existing organizational structures. This means new institutions are a function of pre-existing kind of a prior institutional settings. That's why we need to take a look at the role of six-party talks from this perspective, which means six-party talks are going nowhere, but if we try to realize multilateral institution building in Northeast Asia, I think six-party talks could be playing as a bedrock on which we can build kind of a new, semi kind of a new regional institution. So in similar vein, we need to take advantage of some trilateral efforts if we are interested in launching multilateral institutional settings. So Korea, Japan, United States, trilateral cooperation, or CJK, China, Japan, Korea, trilateral cooperation, Korea, U.S., China trilateral cooperation. These kind of trilateral mechanisms could contribute to building regional institutionalization in the future when we sit down and talk about seriously some conditions for institutional settings. By the way, China is a little bit concerned about Korea, Japan, U.S. Security cooperation, since she believes that this kind of a trilateral mechanism could be working against China to contain China. This is a very controversial subject, but my point is that bilaterals, trilaterals, or even quadrilaterals, and some pre-existing multilateral kind of mechanisms for different purposes should be preserved, and sometimes, if possible, should be promoted if we are trying to launch very serious multilateral institution building in Northeast Asia. So in conclusion, against this backdrop, I think I want to emphasize several points for further discussion. First of all, Northeast Asia peace and security mechanism should be working as a supplementary rather than kind of a substitute for bilateral mechanism. This is addressing the U.S. concern. United States is always concerned about multilateral institution in Northeast Asia that is likely to replace U.S.-led bilateral alliances. So that's why we need to address these concerns by saying that multilateral institution is going to play as a supplementary role. And United States should pay more attention to Northeast Asia. But if you look at what is happening at the moment, the United States strategic attention is rather confined to Southeast Asia. For example, South China Sea area or East China Sea area. But it didn't go up to the Korean Peninsula, even though United States is using their word of so-called strategic patience vis-a-vis North Korea. Thirdly, China should uphold its image as the champion of East Asian regionalism plus. China is always preferring to realize ASEAN plus 3 formula rather than ASEAN plus 3 plus alpha that includes the United States. So that's why the China should try to overcome some somewhat exclusive concept of regionalism. And Japan, as Ambassador Boudreaux already pointed out, the seriousness of historical issues. Japan has a beautiful kind of a precedent in realizing kind of a regional diplomacy when Prime Minister Obuchi was holding power. Japan was implementing so-called human security diplomacy throughout East Asia, which was really well received by all of the regions. So human security is addressing the well-being of humankind. So not just the terrorism, but a variety of issues like environmental disaster, human trafficking, all kind of issues other than hardcore security issues. So if Abe cabinet is trying to deal with these issues rather than sticking to some hard security issues, I think Japan's diplomatic shift is going to be well received. And finally, by the way, even if we are trying to launch a multilateral peace and security mechanism in Northeast Asia, I believe this development should be pursued in parallel with the progress in North Korean nuclear problem. For example, NAPC adopts a kind of a charter in which they emphasize the principles of non-aggression and mutual dialogue or confidence building. Then North Korea is likely to to take that kind of a message as endorsing North Korean nuclear status. So in order to avoid this kind of misgivings vis-a-vis North Korea, I think this kind of institution building progress should be pursued in parallel with the progress in North Korean nuclear issues. Otherwise, we are likely to face a very complicated situation. So, nevertheless, tangible progress in inter-Korean relations should be the precondition to guaranteeing the stability of Northeast Asia. The South and North Korea can participate in such multilateral security mechanism, then it could contribute to consolidating really durable peace mechanism, not just on the Korean Peninsula, but also in Northeast Asia. So on that note, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Kim Sung-han. This keynote session will be followed by a panel discussion. We invited 4 prominent professors from Korea University. I'd like to introduce 4 professors. Professor Kim Nam-guk from the Department of Political Science and International Relations, and he's also the Jang Mon-hae Chair Professor for the European Politics. Professor Jae-seung Lee, on my right, the professor at the Division of International Studies and the Managing Director of the EU Center. Professor Dong-sun Lee from the Political Science and International Relations Department, he is currently head of this department. And Professor Robert Rudolph there, and he's a professor at the Division of International Studies, and he's originating from Europe, as you see. So the panel discussion will be started by Professor Kim Nam-guk.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your insightful keynote speech, Ambassador Budra and Professor Kim. I briefly add up some comments and 2 points. One is about the concept Asian paradox, and the other one is kind of engagement method and Korean Peninsula. First one is the Asian paradox. Asian paradox, as Professor Kim mentioned, and these days very common concept that in Asian situation describing some cooperation in economy, but some stagnant in political relations in these regions. But what I want to mention is those unbalanced relationships is always common in this world, even in European integration procedures. When the European student core community started in 1952, only in 1992, 40 years later, those economic community converted into a political union. So that kind of the time kind of delay is always common. So never be disappointed, right? Those kind of paradox. In a sense, it's kind of an optical illusion, right? Optical illusions, because when we see those European situations in terms of economic integrations, we usually say the 4 stages of the integration procedures. As you know, first is the FTA stages. Those member states removed those tariff barriers, right? That's the FTA stage. And then second stage is custom unions. Custom union means without tariff barrier, but outside of those members, they establish those common tariff barrier. And then third stage is single market. They guaranteed, those member states guaranteed labor, the free movement of labor, capital, and the goods and services. And then finally, the economic union stages. As we see the European unions, there are the common currency, and then also central bankers. Let's compare those 4 stages. Asian situation has even not reached those first stages. See, first stage FTA. In East Asia, well, including those Southeast Asia, there is no meaningful kind of FTA. Of course, there's an FTA in ASEAN and the Japan and ASEAN and the China, but in terms of its size, the volume of economy and the influence is nothing, right? ASEAN's the meaning is not that much important. So, of course, as later Professor Rudolph, I think, explained, since 2012, the many kind of talks, the various FTA talks started within those Asian regions. But still, Asia shows a very low level of economic integration. So if you keep saying Asian paradox, that's a kind of optical illusion. Asia has not that much show a high stage of economic integration. As a matter of course, political relations or political kind of integration is still low. Right? So I think it's a natural kind of progress, those unbalanced kind of relations between the economic integration and the political integration. So never be disappointed. And even further, the Asian situation in terms of economic integration is still very low. And if I add up one more kind of evidence about those low, why is such a low the level of economic integration? Very common kind of the evidence, or the factor is a intra-regional trade ratios. Because intra-regional trade ratio is so low in Asian countries, they don't have any incentive to move a more progress in the economic cooperation in the regions. For example, intra-regional trade ratio in EU is about, in 2011, is about 62%. But Asia is 44%. Of course, it's more than, it's higher than those NAFTA area. NAFTA area is 38%. But those 44%, if we classify it into those ratio as the intermediary product and then the end product, the intermediary product, the trade ratio is 56% in Asian region. And the end product, the final product, the ratio is only 28%. That means when the Asian countries made a final product, they export those products outside Asian countries. So they have a very less incentive to cooperate within those Asian regions. So economic integration in Asia as a result show a very low level, still very low, still not reach yet those fully complete those the FTA stage. And I want to mention the second point is various kind of engagement. These days I heard about the concept engagement in North Korea or engagement in Korean peninsulas. Ambassador Budra shortly before mentioned critical engagement in North Korea. And I heard recently the Professor Shin Gi-wook at Stanford University say about tailored engagement. That means a stage by stage, the incremental engagement in North Korean methods. And then former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kim Sung-hwan, very similar to pronunciation for Vice Minister Kim Sung-han. This guy is Kim Sung-hwan. He, I believe his invention, he used the concept proportional engagement. That means they divided those civilian fund and government fund, and then allow more kind of freedom, more liberty to support the help North Korea for civilian fund, but government fund case, we should strictly constrain or impose some constraint to help and support North Korea in government fund case. So that is a very interesting for me. The situation is very complicated and sometimes, somewhat very interesting, because South and North Korea these days want to go abroad to mobilize support and connections, like the Kang Seok-ju, North Korean Labor Party secretary of international affairs, these days go abroad, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and then met those European Parliament, the chair of the foreign relations committees. And also South Korea is the same kind of movement shows. So, but for great powers, in my impressions, of course, the USA declared those people to Asia, but these days, rapidly, the situation changed, and crisis and challenges in the Middle East, the Islamic State, and then also Ukraine and European kind of situation is also not easy. So these days, the USA need a various kind of many people, like people to Asia, people to Middle East, and people to Europe at the same time. So, in my impression, they relatively or temporarily lose its policy concern or interest in North Korean matters, nuclear weapon matters, or human rights issues and the ranked a lower priorities. So actually, the great powers loosened their grip or their grasp on Korean Peninsula temporarily or relatively. It's a good time to initiate in some move for South and North Korea. And in that context, those all kind of engagement, like Professor Shin and the Minister, the Kim Sung-han, or Ambassador Budra says, the critical engagement, proportional engagement, and then the tailored engagement. So I hope, of course, I'm a political theory major scholar, so I'm not that much know about those detailed policy matters, but I hope see some progress using those engagement concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Our next speaker discussant is Professor Lee Jae-sung.
Thank you, Chairman. And once again, it's a great pleasure to host the very prominent the European diplomat to Korea University. And well, I will make just one brief point, and I would like to save some time for students to make Q&A after this panel discussion, because the time is limited, but the students will also have the tons of interesting inquiries. Okay, well, my point is quite clear, but when we look at the Northeast Asian political situation and political history, not just, well, there might be the two ways to look at those issues in history. One is looking at the shape, how Korea and Japan and China and Russia, how those countries interacted in different shapes. Another way, the other way is looking at the temperature. Whatever the shape would be, what would be the temperature of cooperation, what would be the temperature of coexistence? Then I would say, throughout the recent history, the temperature of cooperation in Northeast Asia has never been warm. Maybe at best somewhat lukewarm. Okay, it used to be cold and then lukewarm and cold, colder and lukewarm. But the thing is, nowadays, well, it used to be cold and it's getting frozen, okay? Especially between Korea and Japan and China versus Japan. Actually, things got a lot worse than I myself expected. So, and I thought about the reason for this colder temperature, and not the climate change, but I found the biggest reason is the political leadership. Okay, and somehow, well, of course, the relatively lower level of economic integration, yes, certainly that might have affected historical legacy, etc., etc. But at some point, a good number of politicians, whether they intended or not, have used this kind of political confrontation as a political asset in their domestic affairs. So the confrontation became political asset for their re-election or other political purpose. So then how to overcome, how to get over it? Okay, so basically confrontation is high politics originated confrontation. Then two possible solutions. One is, okay, bring somewhat like some softer, lower level issues and galvanize those issues and make a spillover. Yes, it might have been the good, well, theoretically it might have been the typical functional spillover. But well, so I myself am a believer of this kind of functional spillover. But at the beginning, especially at the startup period, we do need the higher politics. Okay, high politics problem can only be solved by higher politics. That means leadership and dialogue and consensus among the leadership. Okay. One optimistic, well, I have one sense of the optimism because the night is darkest just before the dawn. So, well, temperature is getting colder, but those three major countries know each other that well, they cannot survive like this forever. So at some point we need the dialogue. And for dialogue, we can learn from the European history. Because well, I do not necessarily think the European path should be and will be the Asia's future. But well, in a universal term, the European experience, especially the historical experience in the 1940s, early 1950s, the role of founding fathers, not just one founding father, but the collaboration among the founding fathers would give a pretty significant implication to Northeast Asian leaders. And if the European Union, together with other international society, can contribute to the peace building in Northeast Asia, then make the leaders talk each other and provide the atmosphere for dialogue and more frequent dialogue and some breakthrough, some founding father role of the leaders. Well, if that kind of role will be encouraged, then I think the international society can better expect a more peaceful and cooperative Northeast Asia. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. I'd like to invite another Professor Lee, Lee Dong-sun from Political Science Department.
Thank you. I have two sets of questions, one for Ambassador Budra and the other for Professor Sung-Han Kim. First, question for Ambassador. Just out of curiosity, how do Europeans feel about America's pivot to Asia? The United States has been initiating this new approach. And pivot to Asia means the United States possibly pulling its weight out of European region, especially because there's no compelling threat in that part of the world, even though Russia is causing some trouble, recently. So, so with the United States pulling its forces and other might out of the region, and At the same time, Russia is trying to, reinforce its old sphere of influence. Would EU be ready to deal with these regional challenges on its own? And following up question is whether your EU will be ready for moving beyond the European continent and do some positive, constructive role in other important regions such as East Asia, for example, dealing with the rising China. And my question for Professor Kim, on your second point, you said the precondition for formal institutionalization in a region is great power balance. And you said such a balance has never been enduring present in Northeast Asia. I'm not sure what you mean by this, because what do you mean by great power? If we take a European example, then do you mean, Germany, Britain, and France were so-called great powers, and they had equally matched power amongst themselves, which enabled, integration among themselves? If so, then what are the great powers in this region? Do you include China here? Okay. And I'm not quite convinced that such a balance of power has never been enduring in this part of the region, because in international politics, as we well know, a lack of balance means mostly, the presence of a hegemonic state or potentially hegemonic state. But I haven't seen such, powerful states for a very long time. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by this precondition that is set out. And maybe we don't want to overmilk the European integration example, but that's the only real example we have. So I'll just try to offer my own reading of history. I think we can think of other preconditions for integration as well, constructing formal institutions. First of all, I think EU was made possible in significant part due to a Russian threat, the Soviet threat, that necessitated cooperation amongst the European states. And what is such a threat to East Asians, Northeast Asians? The only threat that I can think about is actually China, which is regarded as a potential member of regional integration. So where's this threat? And second, I think the United States made a very important role in integrating Europe by sponsoring the integration. And I think at the moment, America is at best very lukewarm about, regionalism, especially when that regionalism means the United States out. So, and finally, the Europeans had a very destructive experience with their, hyper-nationalism, okay? But I think, East Asians are very happy about, their version of nationalisms, and they want to pursue their nationalist aspirations. Nationalism is very positive. It's viewed as very positive ideology among many East Asians. So my bottom line is, isn't it essentially all those preconditions for formal institutionalization are absent, meaning that we have very bleak prospect for formal institutionalization, and which might also mean that we need to find other alternative rather than pushing for something that is not within our reach.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Finally, we have a professional economist. Robert Ruler.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I was asked to prepare a little bit about the current economic situation in East Asia, but now listening to the discussion, I find it more interesting actually to directly go into the discussion and not so much stick with the points that I had here. Maybe because I looked at the growth rates over the last 10 years in the region, and of course we see a slowing down of economic growth not only in China, which still is at a remarkable 7%, but we see it in all countries actually, especially after the 2008 global financial crisis started. For example, Korean growth rates are down from 4.4 to 2.6% on average. And in these times of economic slowdown, I think countries and policymakers are also sometimes becoming reluctant to cooperation, because then countries like Japan and Korea, they have the same export structure actually. They are exporting largely the same goods to Europe, to the US. And so with Shinzo Abe, we know the Abenomics that he started, the devaluation of the yen, basically strongly affected negatively Korean exporters. And he was trying that in order to get out of the growth slump that Japan is in now for almost 20 years after the Japanese housing bubble burst in the mid-90s. And so these deflationary pressures continued in Japan. They're not in a good mood anyway because of these difficult economic situations now for 2 decades. China is rising, so this is a huge change in the Japanese self-perception. And they have a hard time dealing with this, I guess. And so then these territorial disputes come up. And so in a time of global crisis, I think it's difficult to strengthen not only economic but also political integration and cooperation. But this time will also go over, as we know, after slumps, there will be economic booms again. So it will go up in the world economy, and then all these export-driven economies will also increase in their economic performance again. I wanted to answer to the point that Professor Nam-Guk Kim made on that actually integration is pretty low in the region. I don't really agree with that. I think maybe the figures that you have are for all over Asia, not only for, let's say, Japan, Korea, and China. If we would look at the intra-regional trade of only these 3 countries, it would certainly be much higher because, well, especially Korea and Japan, they have a high level of, they're very homogeneous in terms of their economic structures. They have similar levels of GDP per capita. If we look at all over Asia, of course, we have a very heterogeneous structure of countries. We have very poor countries, very rich countries, which is so much different from what we have in the EU. Countries are on the same level. They are all belong to the OECD, are all rich countries. So of course, we would expect that intra-regional trade share is naturally higher. And even though the formal trade integration between Korea, Japan, and China, in terms of the FTAs, negotiations just started. They don't have an FTA yet. The EU is much further with economic union, political union, maybe soon to come. This also basically is not directly comparable because all the countries here in the region are WTO members, and through the WTO process over the last 50 years, we know that most trade barriers have been reduced to very, very low levels already. So an additional FTA would mainly be about technical regulations, about IPR issues between those countries, and not so much about reducing the actual tariffs. Yeah? It would be more about maybe non-tariff barriers and about some critical issues like agrarian structures. Yes, is there anything else? Then just my German view on the cold climate in international relations in East Asia. I just want to add here that, I agree to you, we have to foster some kind of processes, I would say some kind of bottom-up processes here in the EU. We did that between France and Germany with the 1963 Élysée Treaty, which last year had its 50 years birthday. And so we established a lot of, well, we had very bad relations between France and Germany, obviously, yeah? And a lot of nationalism too. So I think also nationalism is something that can be overcome and turned more into cooperation. And so we established a lot of relationships between cities, friendship cities, a lot of student exchanges between countries. And in part, these student exchanges, like we have the Erasmus in Europe here, are started now with Campus Asia, these programs. And so students will be the leaders of the next, in the future. And the more they spend time in other countries, in their neighboring countries, the less they will be as prone to conflict as current leaders are in the region. Yeah.
Great. Oops. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we can extend our session a little bit. So I'm planning to end this session at 12:50. Okay, so we have roughly a 10-minute period, 10-minute window. And in the meantime, I would like to collect a couple of questions, and then from the floor, from the student, and then I will pass the mic to the two keynote speakers, and of course the ambassador Istiaia Buduva. Okay, so any question from the floor? Okay. Just identify yourself first, and then.
Can you hear me without the mic?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. There were a lot of people talking about the current cooperation between the countries in Northeast Asia. And I was, as far as I understand the situation right now, one of the big major issues why cooperation isn't at a point where it could be concerning the Asian paradox is concerned with historical issues. And for that, I got the impression that one of the most strong points that is preventing discussion in this area has to do with the political situation inside Japan. If you look at the LDP, who is most of the time the ruling party in Japan, the LDP itself is a very conservative and very hardline positioned party concerning historical issues. If you look, for example, at some statistics concerning LDP's opinion about, for example, the Yasukuni Shrine, it shows clearly that they have more hardline opinions and concern to other parties. Also, there are a lot of LDP members who were involved in the conservative textbooks who were published in Japan. And as we know, Abe's grandfather is a sentenced Class A criminal. So I was wondering whether you would think that if another party would rule in Japan for a longer term, this would change the current atmosphere, if not among Northeast Asian countries, at least among East Asian countries, so basically Korea, China, and Japan.
Okay, thank you. And any further question?
Hi, my name is Younghyun Lee, studying French International Studies, and thank you very much for letting me participate in this wonderful roundtable. My question is that I think the EU was able to achieve its integration because of two major powers, which are Germany and France, and because those two countries were they desired to stop fighting each other and desired peace among European continent. So those two countries' desire naturally led other countries to join EU, and it kind of led to economic integration and then political integration. So what I think is the three countries, CJK, should to integrate politically. I think before economic integration, the historical issues among three countries should be dealt more seriously than now, because without without solving the historical problems, I don't think those countries could integrate and make more like regional integration. So I want to ask, what do you think about those three countries' historical problem and how this could lead to regional integration? Thank you.
Okay, is there any further question? Otherwise, well, there were two questions from the floor, and also there were a couple of questions and comments raised by the panelists. So why don't I pass the mic first to Professor Sung-Han Kim, and then the Ambassador Istuaya Budura for the big wrap-up.
Thank you for very constructive comments on my remark. First of all, Professor Kim Nam-guk pointed out correctly. There is some dimension of optical illusion about East Asian economic development versus political cooperation. But I want to emphasize one point, which I believe is more important. Why are we saying the central axis of history has been shifted from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, which is Asia? That's not because of economic integration, but because of vitality of economic cooperation. Maybe China has contributed a lot to this kind of a judgment. So academically, we can say the phases of economic integration and its impact upon political cooperation as well as institutionalization, we should not overemphasize those phases of economic integration and its kind of automatic kind of correlation with political institutionalization. Great powers, of course, in Northeast Asia include China, Japan, and the United States. Regarding Professor Lee Dong-sun's question, I didn't say a great power balance was absent in Northeast Asia, but my point is that was not enduringly stable or present in Northeast Asia, probably because China has been rising too rapidly, and Japan has been overtaken by China, and United States had to spare its leadership to the Middle East for the past 10 years. So these kind of factors have contributed to the lack of enduring great power balance. Then do we have to say the political cooperation is extremely bleak in Northeast Asia or in East Asia? I don't think so, because China wants better strategic environment for continued economic progress or cooperation. Japan is searching for a better strategic environment in which they are equally treated as a great power like China or others. So, and United States, under the heading of People to Asia or rebalancing toward Asia, is trying to restore its own leadership role in East Asia. So, if we count these elements into account, I think we don't have to say the strategic promise future is quite bleak. Historical issues among Korea, Japan, and China. This is extremely important issue. So-called the problem of the past. Problem of the past has to be resolved. As another student mentioned, Europe was able to resolve the problem of the past, particularly the great powers. As I mentioned, the corresponding great powers in Northeast Asia, of course, China, Japan, and Korea. These, Korea is not a great power, but these two countries have to reconcile with each other. Then I think we can expect a better environment in which we can talk about even phases of economic development, starting from FTA and moving toward genuine genuine East Asian community. Thank you.
So finally, let me kindly ask Ambassador Istihoya.
Thank you. Let me say how much I'm grateful for the excellent discussions, because most of the colleagues, distinguished professors, or like myself, former senior official Professor Kim, but all the others tried to review a little bit how the current agenda from different perspectives can invite to a further study of the European experience. Let me say how much I do join in this invitation to look carefully into the way in which all along the decades the European experience indeed meant, first of all, reconciliation between former foes, and as it was pointed out, indeed the driving force of the European integration, the reconciliation between Germany and France, was very important from this point of view. Another point which was recognized very much was the leadership shown by the US, from the Marshall Plan to the way in which it took the lead in establishing NATO, an alliance which succeeded in ensuring peace and stability and security in the region. And later on, of course, OSCE process, CSCE, Conference for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and OSCE, not only the US, of course. Some may remember that initially was a Soviet idea, then Finland has taken over. I would not go into history, but once again, it's a process which had many stages. Then I would say this point was made also, the stage, the process, it's very important in recognizing the elements which may play a positive factor in contributing to various approaches for establishing a community, an institution, integration process, and find convergence and shared interests. Then from this point of view, I'm happy to see that regardless of the way in which the European experience is looked upon here, is in many ways understood properly, and I'm sure the work you are doing, the wisdom with which you are trying to look into it, may help to find the proper, favorable, selectively useful elements. From myself, just to answer once again to some of the points which were made, of course, I believe to a certain extent might not be exactly the subject of this discussion, might not be subject of the studies you are conducting right now. The cultural elements, those linked to the specific of the societies in Europe, the way in which the relation between individuals and the communities may play a role as a background in which the nations engage in a certain process, might be also relevant. Of course, one point was made, probably now in Europe we are in the postmodern, post-national state, in a more globalized environment, which might be slightly different from what we have here in Northeast Asia specifically, or in Asia in general. Because of that, probably nationalism, as it was suggested, should be seen in a different light. I would beg to be forgiven and I would not adventure myself in trying to assess that, but I'm sure a study in that respect may say how much at a certain point in time here the nation building, state building at various stages, not only Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia is a process in which also Europeans should look more carefully for a better understanding. Back to the European integration, I would say there is something which may, as it was pointed out, be indeed a very important one, beyond the historical reconciliation between former enemies and adversaries. The fact that indeed economic factor in the post-Second World War environment has played a role, and the needs of having closer economic cooperation played into that. The EEC was indeed something which created the habit of work together, shared interests, managing the clashing interests in many ways. You may remember tomatoes war, milk war, then we had wars in inverted commas, but which were handled in a way which reflected shared interest. Then from this point of view, let me say how much personally I looked to a certain degree of interest to the way in which the trilateral cooperation has started, and I'm happy that each time I came to Seoul in the last 3 years, I had a chance to visit the headquarters here and to meet the Secretary Generals and see how much there was hope, there was an effort, there are mechanisms functioning to a certain level, and maybe is an enlightening and useful experience. On the question how much we see meaningful the US pivot to Asia, let me say that we are close partners, strategic partners with the American colleagues. I'm welcoming them to come and see us this January. Daniel Russell came. Before it was Campbell visiting us in the last 3 years. I went to Washington 2 years ago in January, immediately after the establishment of our department. After Russell's visit in January, I went in early February to exchange views on Asian affairs. They tried to explain this pivot. You know, itself, the concept is to a certain extent evolving, being reassessed, translated in more plainly, simple and clearer concept. What I'm trying to say that for us, for the EU and the member state, US is a partner in Asia. If you read carefully the joint statement issued by High Representative Ashton with the then State Secretary Hillary Clinton in July 2012, you'll see not only the fact that we are pointing out to the shared interests in working together for the peace and stability in Asia, but there is a very important point. It's not two of us working against those in the area, but in a very respectful and considerate way, EU, US working with Asian partners together. Then it was what we suggested, it was what was properly understood by US and embraced, and it's the spirit in which we are trying to develop this cooperation, and we have very specific and concrete cases of cooperation, and I can tell you how much we are working together for a number of years in Myanmar, in Burma, for ensuring a stable process of democratization and progress of the reforms, and in many other places across Asia. I got a number of visits from senior American officials exchanging views about human rights in North Korea, about our dialogue with Korean officials. Then we compare notes, we coordinate our positions in one of the most comprehensive framework of security and cooperation in the region, ASEAN regional forums. Then for the pivot, of course, we look into that, expecting to see what are the way in which US wants to re-engage in the region, what kind of resources is engaging. We listen carefully to the senior officials, like it was the case in Shangri-La dialogue at the end of May, beginning of June. Of course, we try to understand how much that's done in a way which may be seen in a difficult and not exactly entirely acceptable way by the Chinese, for example. How much at that time, again, the Prime Minister Abe stressed on the rule of law and on multilateralism, to a certain extent echoing what was said by Obama at West Point, and later also in another press conference explained by Danny Russell. Then from this point of view, I guess it's a process in which United States, beyond certain things which also were discussed here, bilateralism and regionalism, may be an important factor in trying to update the way in which it's managing the bilateral alliances. In this respect, we'll be eager to listen to your own experience in doing that with American allies. To a certain extent, we are trying to see how much this pivot means something for the way in which US is trying to build up the multilateral structure, which is still in an incipient stage in spite of the anniversary which may have soon, the East Asia Summit. And of course, the EU is eager to join in this process in East Asia Summit. Brief answer to how EU is ready to manage on its own in Europe in case US might be tempted to roll back. I'm not sure US is doing that. It might be a way in which, of course, in the complex agenda US may have with a lot of priorities, including Middle East, which stays, unfortunately, because of Islamic State, the one which is now a challenge for the international community, because of the challenges in Asia, of course. I'm not sure it's rolling back. First, because the way in which NATO now is doing, again, important things in stabilizing Europe, it may represent an anchor of stability, NATO, for the relations with Europe, and the relations of the strategic nature between the EU and US, including the negotiations of the new trade and investment strategic agreement, may represent anchors for the future. But yes, EU increasingly may have the resources and the means to do it and to work together with US at the level which that would be found appropriate by the leaders in Europe, but also beyond. And in this respect, let me say how much the experience we had in contributing to the management of crisis in Africa, for example, generated in the last 5 years what we call comprehensive approach, or if you wish, in a simple way, 3Ds: diplomacy, development, defense, a combination of various resources and instruments which are trying from different perspectives to address the multiple layers of a crisis, roots, causes, and to try to promote solutions and to manage a process in which the things may go back to peace and stability. Then now EU, including by the fact of having European External Action Service, is better equipped to go beyond Europe, including to Asia. And that happens because, as I was saying, now gradually are expanding our cooperation in two ways. Just two brief points. As I mentioned about the strategic partners, we are trying to establish as much as possible with each and every Asian partners, dealing with 47 countries in Asia and Pacific, out of these 15 territories and countries in the Pacific, the rest Asia, in a twofold way, with a political agreement and with an FTA or an economic or investment agreement, then creating a framework in which we do two things. We inject our values. Each and every political agreement has at least 3 core provisions: human rights, non-proliferation and disarmament, financial and tax transparency. These are things which are very important for the bilateral relations, for the regional environment, for the behavior of the country in the regional community. And of course, FTA, I would not speak about that because you, at various levels, with various configuration, are important. And finally, I would say, beyond this bilateral twofold approach, FTA's political agreement, more active contribution in the multilateral setting. I mentioned ARF, EU-ASEAN relations, EU strategic partners, and China, because China was also one of the questions. We have a constructive engagement, this is the label, with China, and in the last 4 years we succeeded to build also as I was mentioning with Korea, but in a different way, a complete architecture of our relationship, which is engaging China economically. I spoke about the investment agreement, which is in the course of negotiation, a strategic partnership with an agenda till 2020, with a very comprehensive range of areas of cooperation, more than 80 bilateral mechanisms of sectorial cooperation, and people-to-people exchanges. I know you had a similar experience, very comprehensive, during the visit of the President Xi Jinping, a climax of bilateral dialogue and cooperation with very many relevant areas for cooperation between the neighbors. On Japan, briefly, I fully agree with many points which were made here about Japan, especially linked to the historical issues. I believe in this respect, the answer should come from each and every nation here. I was here in Korea when some Japanese leaders came and saying sorry, visiting museums, memorial places, and it felt right. I've heard about the discussions about reviewing Kono or Murayama's apologies. I felt that in this respect, indeed, the Japanese leaders can show political wisdom, can show sensitivity for the feelings of the neighbors, and I'm sure in the future they can find a way to accommodate that. To the same extent, I believe the younger generation in learning about history, and I do not forget the textbook issue, have a contribution to make. It was the same in Europe. There are many ways in which you here at the EU Center, in cooperation with many other universities across Korea, but also in cooperation with universities in China and Japan, can make a contribution together with the researchers, historians in these three countries. I'm full of confidence in that respect. It may be not exactly entirely a political exercise, but it might be one intellectually and nationally sensitive and important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, and dear participant, let me warmly thank for two excellent keynote remarks and also the good panel discussion and good question from the floor, and most of all, the good attention from the participant. We've been talking about the regional order in Northeast Asia during past couple of decades, but I remember most of the settings were Northeast Asia from the perspective of the United States, or China, Japan, and South Korea. And the discussion on Northeast Asia from the European and Korean perspective was relatively quite rare. But I think this is the area we should work more on. And the KU-KIEP-SBS EU Center will be actively enhance further discussion on this important topic. So once again, thank you very much, and please give warm hands to the excellent speakers today.